7 minutes, not a second more, he barked, like she controlled time. The waitress, all of 22, nodded, her hands shaking just a hair as she gripped her order pad. Julian Croft, stone-cold titan, wouldn't notice, of course. He lived in a world of billions in boardrooms, not trembling servers and overdue rent. But here's the thing. That small slip of paper she'd pressed into his palm with the stake wasn't a desperate plea for cash. No, it was a lifeline, a message promising his perfectly constructed reality would fracture. He thought he knew loss. He was wrong. He had no idea that her grandmother's kindness, buried for decades, would soon rewrite his entire existence. A kindness he'd forgotten or never truly understood. 7 minutes, not a second more, he barked, like she controlled time. The waitress, all of 22, nodded, her hands shaking just a hair as she gripped her order pad. Julian Croft, stone-cold titan, wouldn't notice, of course. He lived in a world of billions in boardrooms, not trembling servers and overdue rent. But here's the thing. That small slip of paper she'd pressed into his palm with the stake wasn't a desperate plea for cash. No, it was a lifeline. A message promising his perfectly constructed reality would fracture. He thought he knew loss. He was wrong. He had no idea that her grandmother's kindness, buried for decades, would soon rewrite his entire existence. A kindness he'd forgotten or never truly understood. Julian Croft didn't traffic in ghosts. He'd built an empire precisely to keep them at bay, a glittering fortress of steel and strategy erected on the flattened ruins of the past. His name, whispered in hushed tones from Wall Street trading floors to Davos conference rooms, was synonymous with ruthless efficiency. Sentiment was a liability, nostalgia a disease. He inhabited a world meticulously curated for control. From the soundproof serenity of his corner office, 30 stories above Central Park, to the encrypted lines that hummed with the lifeblood of global finance, every aspect of his existence was optimized for peak performance. At 58, his face was a roadmap of ambition, etched by decades of calculated risks and sleepless nights. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, missed nothing. Tonight, like every Tuesday, Julian dined alone at the Gilded Steer, a culinary sanctuary so exclusive its location was an open secret amongst the 1%. Deals were brokered over dry-aged ribeyes, fortunes shifted with a shared glance. For Julian, it was simply a Tuesday, an interlude between a 14-hour workday and the desolate grandeur of his penthouse. He occupied his usual secluded booth, the soft leather sighing beneath his impeccably tailored suit. The amber glow of the ambient lighting danced on the crystal of his water glass, catching the subtle gleam of his Patek Philippe. "Good evening, sir. My name is Mia, and I'll be your server tonight." Julian didn't bother looking up from the wine list bound in supple Moroccan leather. "A bottle of the 98 Screaming Eagle Cabernet, and I'll have the A5 Wagyu, medium rare. Don't let the chef rest it for more than 7 minutes." "Of course, sir," the voice replied, a tremor of nervousness betraying the server's youth. He registered the slight waiver, dismissed it, and returned to the data streams flickering across his tablet screen. For 20 minutes, he commanded markets with a flick of his thumb, his focus absolute. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the distant sizzle of the kitchen, all faded into a meaningless background hum. Mia returned, her movements practiced but still radiating an almost palpable unease. She presented the wine with exaggerated reverence, decanting the deep ruby liquid with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. Julian offered a curt nod, his eyes never leaving the screen. When the steak arrived, it was perfection. A flawless slab of marbled beef, seared to a perfect crust, the center a warm, vibrant pink. A testament to craft and quality, values Julian understood implicitly. He finally deactivated his tablet, allowing himself this solitary indulgence. He ate with the same methodical efficiency he applied to everything else, appreciative but not indulgent. As he savored the last bite, Mia reappeared to clear the plate. "Was everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's murmur. He was momentarily surprised she used his name, but dismissed it as a standard perk of the exorbitant prices. "It was acceptable," he replied. his highest form of praise. He reached for his wallet, a slim rectangle of black crocodile skin, intending to leave a generous tip. It wasn't kindness, but a calculation. Expected. As she reached for the plate, her fingers brushed against his. A fleeting, accidental contact. Yet it felt like a jolt of static electricity. For the first time all evening, he truly looked at her. She was young, achingly so. Barely into her 20s, he guessed. Large, expressive eyes the color of dark honey, sprinkled with freckles across her nose. Brown hair, pulled back in a severe ponytail that did little to tame the wisps that framed her face. She looked tired, beyond merely end-of-shift tired. A bone-deep exhaustion seemed to weigh on her shoulders. But beneath the fatigue, a spark flickered in her eyes. Fear? Defiance? Her hand trembled as she placed the bill folder on the table. "Thank you for dining with us, sir." As she pulled her hand away, something remained. A small, neatly folded piece of paper, the same off-white color as a linen napkin. A flagrant breach of protocol. He felt a prickle of irritation. Was this a business proposition? A desperate plea for cash? He usually let his security team handle such overtures. He fixed her with a cold stare, expecting her to flinch. Instead, she met his gaze, holding it for a fraction of a second. In those honey-colored depths, he saw a whirlwind of emotion. Apology, plea, and a desperate hope, all warring for dominance. Then she turned and disappeared into the orchestrated chaos of the restaurant. Julian sighed, annoyed by the interruption. He picked up the note, intending to discard it with the bill. But a long dormant emotion, curiosity, stayed his hand. He unfolded the small square of paper. The handwriting was a delicate, slightly shaky cursive. It wasn't a phone number. It wasn't a request for money. It was a single sentence. 8 words that stole the air from his lungs and sent a tremor through his ruthlessly controlled world. The note read, "Do you remember the promise under the willow tree?" And beneath it a single devastating initial? E. Time for Julian Croft had always been a linear progression, a commodity to be managed, maximized, and conquered. But in the instant he read those words, time fractured. The present, the opulent restaurant, the half-empty wine glass, the scent of seared beef and old money, receded into a distant hum. He was no longer in a Manhattan steakhouse. He was 20 years old, standing on the damp grass of a university campus, the scent of summer rain hanging heavy in the air. The willow tree, the memory buried so deep he'd believed it fossilized, erupted into his mind with the force of a geyser. It was vivid, visceral. He could feel the rough bark against his back, see the way the setting sun filtered through the weeping branches, painting golden stripes on her face. Her initial E, burned on the page like a brand on his soul. Alara Vance, his first love. The woman who had vanished from his life nearly 40 years ago. The woman who was dead. His knuckles were white as he gripped the table's edge. A cold dread, colder than any boardroom negotiation, washed over him. His heart, a reliable and steady organ, hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Dead. She had died in a car accident, a fiery crash on a winding coastal highway in California. He'd received the news via a stilted third-hand phone call. There was no funeral he could attend, no family to console. She was an orphan, just like him. There was just an abyss where she used to be. The grief had hollowed him out, and he had filled the void with work, ambition, and a relentless pursuit of power. He had built his empire on her grave. "Sir? Mr. Croft, is everything all right?" The restaurant manager, a portly man named Francois, with a perpetually worried expression, was standing by his table. Julian realized he'd been sitting there, motionless, staring at the note for several minutes. His breathing was shallow. "I'm fine," Julian clipped out, his voice a low growl. He quickly folded the note, his movement stiff and unnatural, and slipped it into his breast pocket. It felt like it was scorching the fabric of his suit. The bill. He signed the check with a hand that was not quite steady, adding a tip so large it made Francois's eyes widen. He didn't care. He needed to get out. He needed air. As he strode through the restaurant, his composure a carefully reconstructed mask, he scanned the staff, searching for the waitress, Mia. But she was gone. Vanished. He needed to understand. This couldn't be some random con. He needed to understand how this girl knew and why that meant she had to tell me who you are. Tell me who you are. Tears welled in her eyes and she shook her head. You don't understand. I shouldn't have done it. It was stupid. I was desperate. Please just forget about it. Throw the note away. It's a little late for that, he said, his voice hardening again. You opened a door I thought was sealed forever. You don't get to close it now. Who is he? Her resolve crumbled. A single tear traced a path through the faint dusting of flour on her cheek. It's who you think it is, she said, her voice cracking. It's my grandmother, Ara. Julian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Hearing the name spoken aloud connected to this young woman made it terrifyingly real. Your grandmother is alive? Mia. Amelia nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Yes, she's alive, but she's sick. Very sick. And we are out of money. The insurance ran out. The hospital was going to move her to a state facility, a place people go to die. I was desperate. I saw your name on the reservation list. I knew who you were. She used to tell me stories about a brilliant, ambitious boy named Julian, about a promise. The words hit him like a physical assault. Ilara was alive, but she was dying, and she had been reduced to this, sending her granddaughter, a child burdened with an impossible legacy, to beg for help from a ghost from her past. Why? Julian asked, the single word loaded with 40 years of pain and confusion. Why did she disappear? Why did she let me think she was dead? Amelia looked over her shoulder again, a flicker of that same fear returning. She had to. She was being threatened. She was scared, not for herself, but for her family, for my mother. Threatened by whom? Julian demanded. The story was spiraling, getting darker and more complex with every sentence. Amelia hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She never told me everything, just that it was someone from your world, someone from the very beginning of your company, someone powerful and ruthless. Julian's mind raced, sifting through the ghosts of his early career. There were dozens of rivals' enemies he had crushed on his way to the top. But who would threaten Ara? Why? It made no sense. I need a name. Amelia. She made me promise not to say, Amelia whispered. He's still out there, still powerful. She's terrified of him, even now. I am more powerful. Julian stated the words coming out as cold as steel. It was not a boast, it was a fact. I can protect you. I can protect her. But you have to tell me who did this. Who stole 40 years of my life? Amelia looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw past the billionaire, past the cold facade, and saw the raw pain in his eyes. She saw the 20-year-old boy who had lost the love of his life. And in that moment, she made a decision. She took a shaky breath and spoke the name. A name that caused the blood to turn to ice in Julian Croft's veins. His name is Marcus Thorne. The name hung in the air of the small park, a poison that contaminated 4 decades of history. Marcus Thorne. Julian felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice. It wasn't just the name of his co-founder, his former friend, his most bitter and hated rival. It was the sudden, sickening clarity that came with it. All the disjointed pieces of his past slammed into place, forming a picture of such monstrous betrayal that it stole his breath. Marcus and Julian, they had been the two sides of the same coin. Julian was the strategist, the visionary. Marcus was the charming, reckless salesman, the one who could sell ice in a blizzard. But beneath the charm, Marcus was a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice. He lacked a moral compass. In the early days, Julian had seen it as a necessary ruthlessness. Now he saw it for what it was, a pathology. He knew her. Julian said the words more to himself than to Amelia. He knew about us. She said he was obsessed, Amelia whispered, sensing she had just lit a fuse. She said he was charming at first, but then he got scary. He saw her as something you had that he wanted, a prize. When she refused his advances, he couldn't handle it. He told her that if she stayed with you, he would ruin you. And if that didn't work, he would hurt you. She believed him. The willow tree. The promise. I'll protect you. He had promised to be her shield, but he had unknowingly been the very reason she needed one. His ambition, his partnership with a serpent, had been the threat all along. The car accident, the conveniently lost files. Marcus was wealthy and connected even then, bribing a few small-town cops a coroner. For him, it would have been trivial. He had forced Ara to fake her death, threatening to harm Julian if she ever tried to contact him. He had orchestrated the entire tragedy, then stood by Julian's side, offering hollow condolences while celebrating his victory in secret. He hadn't just stolen Julian's love. He had weaponized his grief, using it to ensure Julian's focus remained solely on building the company, their company. A volcanic rage, cold and terrifyingly precise, began to build within Julian. It was the same controlled fury he brought to a hostile takeover. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was a debt of blood and time that had been compounding for 40 years. "Where is she?" he asked Amelia, his voice dangerously quiet. "A small nursing home in upstate New York. It's not the best place, but it was all we could afford," she admitted, her voice thick with shame. "I visit every weekend." "Not anymore," Julian said, pulling out his phone. He dialed a number. "Dr. Evans, it's Julian Croft. I have a patient who needs to be transferred to your private wing at Mount C immediately. Her name is Ara Vance." "Yes, Vance. I want your best team, your best room, and absolute discretion. A helicopter will be en route to a location I'm about to send you within the hour. Spare no expense." He hung up and looked at Amelia, whose face was a mask of stunned disbelief. "You're not going back to your apartment," he continued, already dialing David Chen. "You're not going back to either of your jobs. As of this moment, you are under my protection. A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a secure suite at the Four Seasons. Pack nothing. We will buy you whatever you need. You are not to contact anyone. Is that clear?" She could only nod, overwhelmed. "Chen," he spoke into the phone. "Execute the Thorn Protocol." There was a moment of silence on the other end. The Thorn Protocol was a contingency plan Julian had created years ago, a doomsday file on his rival. It was a collection of every piece of dirt, every questionable deal, every legal gray area Marcus Thorn had ever been involved in. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction intended for use only if Marcus ever crossed a final line. "Are you certain, Julian?" Chen's voice was grave. "This is scorched earth." "Light the match," Julian said, "and I want our legal team ready. I also want you to find 2 people for me, a retired police officer from the Metairie County Sheriff's Department and a coroner from the same jurisdiction, both active in 1986. Find them. Offer them anything. Money protection and new life. I want them to talk." He ended the call. The gears were in motion. The full crushing weight of Julian Croft's empire was now being aimed at one man. This would not be a quick battle. It would be a meticulous, systematic annihilation. "What are you going to do?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. Julian looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had not seen before. "Your grandmother told you I was a king in a glass castle. She was right. And what a king does Amelia when a serpent gets into his garden is he cuts off its head." Over the next few days, Julian orchestrated his war from a suite he had taken across the hall from Amelia's. While she was being debriefed by his staff fitted for new clothes and speaking with the doctors who were now overseeing Ara's care, Julian was dismantling Marcus Thorn's life piece by piece. Chen's team worked miracles. They located the retired coroner, a man named Albert Wesker, living in a trailer park in Arizona. Racked with guilt and a gambling addiction, it took very little persuasion for him to confess. He had been paid $50,000 in 1986 to falsify dental records for a Jane Doe victim of a hit and run and switch them with Alaris. The money had come from a shell corporation that Chen's forensic accountants, armed with this new information, were now able to trace directly back to Marcus Thorn. The Thorn Protocol was unleashed. Anonymous tips were sent to the SEC regarding stock manipulation. Evidence of insider trading was leaked to the Wall Street Journal. Key engineers at Thor Industries were poached with astronomical offers. A major European contract Thorn was about to sign was suddenly and inexplicably canceled after the CEO received a dossier on Thorn's unethical labor practices in Southeast Asia. Marcus Thorn was bleeding, and he had no idea where the attacks were coming from. He was flailing, his paranoia growing. He was calling Julian, leaving furious accusatory voicemails. Julian ignored them all. He would not give Marcus the satisfaction of a confrontation until the time was right. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday afternoon. Amelia, looking through a box of her grandmother's old things that had been brought from the nursing home, found a small leather-bound journal. Most of it was filled with sketches and notes about art, but in the back there were several pages written in a frantic, terrified scroll. It was Laura's account of her last days before she died. It detailed Marcus's threats, his chilling words, his specific demands. It was a confession written by the victim. It was the nail for the coffin. Julian had the journal authenticated. Now he was ready. He sent a single text message to Marcus Thorne. "My office within 1 hour. Come alone." He was going to enjoy this. Marcus Thorne strode into the lobby of Croft Innovations like a conquering general. But Julian, watching on a security monitor from his 80th floor office, could see the cracks in his facade. The arrogant swagger was still there, but his eyes were constantly scanning. His jaw was tight, and there was a sheen of sweat on his brow. He was a predator who sensed a trap, but was too proud to avoid it. Julian's office was a monument to minimalist power. It was vast and uncluttered, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of New York City. The only furniture was a massive obsidian desk and two starkly elegant chairs facing it. Julian sat behind the desk, not in his usual high-back throne, but in a chair identical to the visitors. He wanted them to be on equal footing for this. He wanted to look Marcus directly in the eye. The door opened and Marcus entered, flanked by two of his own bodyguards. David Chen and another of Julian's men stepped forward, blocking their path. "Mr. the Croft is expecting Mr. Thorne alone," Chen said, his voice flat and unyielding. Marcus waved his men off with a flicker of irritation. "It's fine," he snarled. The door closed, leaving the two men alone. The silence in the cavernous office charged with 40 years of animosity. "Julian!" Marcus began, his voice a low growl as he paced in front of the desk. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. My company is under attack. My life is being systematically dismantled. I know it's you. This has your stink all over it. Cold, precise, cowardly." Julian remained silent, his hands resting calmly on the desk. He simply watched Marcus, letting his rage and paranoia fill the room. "Is this about the Henderson deal?" Marcus spat. "Or is this just your ego so fragile that you can't stand to see me succeed? After all these years, you still can't get over the fact that I built my own empire after you threw me out of yours." "Sit down, Marcus," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it held an authority that made Marcus halt his pacing. He glared at Julian for a moment before sinking into the chair opposite the desk. "Talk," Marcus demanded. Instead of talking, Julian tapped the surface of his desk. A holographic display shimmered to life between them, showing a high-resolution scan of a page from a journal. It was handwriting. Marcus's eyes flickered toward the display. A tiny, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in his cheek. He feigned indifference. "What is this poetry?" "It's a confession," Julian said softly. "A very detailed one about a young man who was so twisted by jealousy and entitlement that he threatened to destroy the woman he supposedly wanted and the man she loved." Julian tapped the desk again. An audio file began to play. It was the scratchy recorded voice of Albert Wesker, the former coroner, detailing how he was paid to switch dental records on a Jane Doe to fake a death. Marcus's mask of arrogance began to crack. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty gray. Old stories, hearsay from a degenerate gambler. "This is pathetic, Julian. This is what you have." "It's a start," Julian said, his voice remaining chillingly calm. He brought up a new file, a complex web of financial transactions, tracing the $50,000 bribe from Marcus's offshore account to Wesker. "The SEC will find this particularly interesting, especially since that same account was used for the insider trading you committed last year." Marcus stared at the evidence, his breathing growing ragged. He was trapped. He knew it. The predator was finally in the cage. Marcus whispered the name, sounding like a curse on his lips. "She's alive." It wasn't a question. It was a horrified realization. "Yes," Julian said, and for the first time, he allowed the raw glacial fury to show in his eyes. "No thanks to you. You left her to rot. You let her live in fear for 40 years while you built your fortune on the company we started. You stood next to me and pretended to mourn her. You don't understand, Marcus stammered, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the desperate panic of a cornered animal. I loved her. You were going to drag her into this ugly world. I was protecting her. You loved what she represented, Julian roared, slamming his hand on the desk, the sudden violence making Marcus flinch. She was a possession, something I had that you coveted. You didn't protect her. You put her in a cage. You buried her alive. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Marcus. For 40 years I've carried that grief. It was the engine of my success. I built this entire world, he said, gesturing to the city below on a foundation of her memory. And you knew it was all a lie. What do you want, Julian? Marcus asked, his voice weak. Money. You have more than God. My company. Take it. It's yours. Julian turned around slowly, a humorous smile on his face. Your company is already a carcass, Marcus. My people are picking it clean as we speak. By tomorrow, you'll be facing federal investigations that will last you the rest of your life. Your name will be synonymous with fraud and disgrace. No, I don't want your company. He walked back to the desk and leaned over it, his face just inches from Marcus. I want the one thing you can never get back. I want your time. You stole 40 years from me and from her. Now you will spend whatever time you have left in a prison of your own making, broke, alone, and forgotten. You will be a ghost, Marcus, just like you made her. Julian pressed a hidden button on his desk. David sent in our guests. The door opened. It wasn't security. It was two stone-faced FBI agents in dark suits. They walked towards Marcus, who looked up at them with the dead eyes of a man whose world had just ended. Marcus Thorne, the lead agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. You're under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering. As they pulled a stunned Marcus to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back, his eyes met Julian's one last time. There was no hatred left in them, only a hollow, empty understanding. Julian watched them lead him away. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound, aching emptiness. He had won. He had exacted his revenge. But it wouldn't give him back the years. It wouldn't heal, and it wouldn't erase the memory of the promise he had failed to keep. The private wing of Mount Sai was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the corner suite overlooking Central Park. The constant beeping and sterile shunel of a typical hospital room were replaced by the quiet hum of state-of-the-art medical equipment tastefully hidden and the faint scent of fresh flowers from a vase filled with white leaves. Era Vance lay in the bed looking frail and small against the pristine white sheets. 40 years had changed her. Her once vibrant auburn hair was now thin and silver. Her skin was as delicate and translucent as old parchment, and her artist's hands were gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes, when they opened to see Julian standing in the doorway, her eyes were the same. They held the same warmth, the same intelligence, the same soul-deep recognition that had captivated him all those years ago. Amelia was sitting by the bed holding her grandmother's hand. She gave Julian a small, encouraging smile and quietly slipped out of the room, giving them their moment. Julian walked slowly towards the bed, his heart a painful, heavy weight in his chest. This was the moment he had both dreaded and yearned for. What do you say to a ghost? How do you bridge a 40-year chasm of lies and loss? Julian, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, my king in a glass castle. He reached the bedside and gently took her hand. It felt impossibly fragile in his. He couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of emotion so immense it threatened to break him. I'm sorry, she said, tears welling in her ancient, beautiful eyes. I was so scared. He was a monster. I knew he would hurt you. I thought if I disappeared, you would be safe. You could build your empire. I would have burned it to the ground for one more day with you. He finally managed to say, his voice thick. I would have traded all of it. I know, she smiled a faint, sad smile. That's why I had to leave. Your fire was too bright to be put out for my sake. They sat in silence for a long time, their hands clasped together, communicating more in that quiet touch than words ever could. He told her about his life, The hollow victories, the meaningless acquisitions, the lonely penthouse. She told him about hers, about raising her daughter Sarah in secret, always looking over her shoulder. She told him about her joy in becoming a grandmother to Amelia, a bright spark who had her spirit. She had lived a small, quiet life, always under the shadow of Marcus Thorne's threat. "He's gone," Julian told her gently. "He'll never hurt anyone again." A look of profound relief washed over her face, and for the first time in 40 years, the fear in her eyes was finally extinguished. "You kept your promise, Julian Croft," she whispered, her eyelids growing heavy. "You found me. You kept me safe." The doctors had been clear. Her condition was advanced, the years of stress and inadequate medical care having taken their toll. They could make her comfortable. They could give her a little more time, but they couldn't give her a future. Julian didn't leave her side for the next 2 weeks. He had his office moved to the hospital suite. He took calls and ran his global enterprise from the chair beside her bed. He read to her. He listened to her stories, and sometimes they just sat in silence, watching the seasons change in the park below. He was giving her in her final days the life they should have had in a strange, bittersweet way. He was finally home. Amelia was there every day. Julian saw so much of Era in her kindness, her resilience, her artist soul. He learned that her dream was to be a museum curator, to share the beauty of art with the world, just as her grandmother had once shared it with him. Era passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning as the sun was rising over the reservoir, her hand in Julian's. Her last word was his name. After the small private funeral, Julian found himself at a crossroads. The rage that had fueled him was gone. The grief that had shaped him had transformed. He was no longer the cold, empty man who had walked into the Gilded Steer. A month later, he called Amelia to his office. "Your student loans have been paid," he said, getting straight to the point. "A trust has been established in your name. You will never have to worry about money again. You can quit your jobs and focus on your studies." Amelia was speechless. "Julian, I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not a gift," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "It's an investment, Alara. She saw the world in a way I never could. She saw beauty. You have that same gift. The world needs people like you." He slid a brochure across the desk. It was for the Croft Foundation, his philanthropic arm. "I'm creating a new wing of the foundation," he explained, "the Aller Vance Initiative for the Arts. It will fund museums, grant scholarships to young artists, and preserve cultural heritage. Its endowment will be $1 billion, and I need someone to run it." Amelia stared at him, her honey-cold eyes wide with disbelief. "But I'm just a student. You are Ara's legacy," he said, "and you have a fire in you that reminds me of her. This foundation isn't about me. It's about honoring her, and I can think of no one better to be its guardian." That afternoon, Julian left his office early. He had Thomas drive him not to his penthouse, but to the university campus he hadn't set foot on in 40 years. He found the spot by the lake. The old willow tree was still there, bigger and more majestic than he remembered, its branches weeping to the ground, creating that same secret sacred space. He stood beneath its branches, the setting sun filtering through the leaves, and for the first time since he was a boy, Julian Croft wept. He wept for the love he had lost, for the years that were stolen, and for the promise that had in the end finally been kept. He had his empire, his glass castle, but he knew now that the greatest treasures were not the ones you could buy, but the ones you held in your heart. A memory, a promise, and the enduring echo of a lost love. Julian Croft's story teaches us that no matter how high we build our walls, no matter how much wealth we accumulate, a single echo from the past can bring it all tumbling down. It's a powerful reminder that our lives are defined not by our successes, but by the promises we keep and the love we hold on to. He was a billionaire who could buy anything except a second chance. But through a simple note passed by a struggling waitress, he was given something far more valuable: redemption. He found that true wealth isn't in a stock portfolio, but in honoring a memory and shaping a better future. What did you think of Julian's journey? Was his revenge on Marcus justified? And what does it say about the promises we make in our own lives? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.